I think most companies have failed their managers. They underinvest in training with little practical guidance provided early in managers' tenure. They underinvest in community building for their leaders. They put out a training or two throughout the year, usually directly having to do with performance management, and usually watered down by 100 rounds of revisions through HR and legal. But it comes out to a training that's basically some vagaries about do active listening and be empathetic.
Yes. Hey, Luca here. Welcome to a new episode of the Refactoring podcast, where every 2 weeks we interview a world-class tech leader. Today's guest is Meg Adams, who is Senior Director of Engineering for the New York Times. With Meg, we talked about her fantastic journey in tech, from management in sales and retail to learning software development from scratch to management again, but this time in technology. And then we especially talked about Neuro Leadership, what it is, how you can apply it in practice in your team processes, and how things are different for ICs versus managers, and how you scale all of this to your whole organization. So let's dive right into the action. Welcome, Meg, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I am so excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too. So, Meg, you are a Senior Director of Engineering for the New York Times. And to break the ice, as we always do, I just wanted to ask you how you got into tech and what have been the highlights of your journey so far.
Oh, absolutely. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So my career has been a little bit unusual in that I became an engineer in order to become an engineering leader. It's something I knew that I wanted to do. I really wanted to work in management and leadership, which is very much my craft. And I chose engineering as the domain where I wanted to apply that skill. So my original degree is in elementary education. So I was a teacher and ultimately decided that while I loved working with kids, the public school system has its flaws in America. And I felt quite frustrated and not
Even
totally
in Italy, if you may say so. Yes. Probably everywhere.
Yeah, it's a challenge. So I looked around at what was available to me at the time. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And so I started managing a retail store. And very surprising to me, I realized how quickly everything I'd learned in my teaching degree about human development, the brain, growth, all these things was very, very applicable in management and leadership. And being in a sales environment, I got to see very quickly how applying these things and building a really healthy, thriving team led to very real dollar results. So that was completely exciting, super addicting. Our store was crushing it. Our employee retention was amazing. And I was like, I want to do this. So not wanting to work in retail forever, I looked around at what was available to me. And at the time, it was very popular, or more popular than it is today, I'll say, for self-taught coding. So I taught myself to code, spent a year super heads down teaching myself the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and tricked myself into a job. And spent several years as an engineer before ultimately becoming an engineering leader, which was my original goal. And I've been able to work with some amazing companies since becoming a leader.
Hey, before we continue, I want to tell you more about today's sponsor, which is Augment Code. Augment is the only AI coding platform built for real engineering teams, not to vibe code, but to make real progress. And that's because Augment truly understands your code base. It has a custom-built context engine that takes into account every repo and every file in your stack, scaling nicely to tens of millions of lines of code. So it can actually help to write functions, fix CI/CD issues, triage incidents, and review PRs, all from your IDE or from your terminal. Learn more on augmentcode.com. Yeah, so you've been at Etsy, you're now at New York Times. You've had a long journey in tech now after your initial stint in retail and non-tech things.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast the time goes. I started out at Condé Nast, so working in
Yes.
some amazing magazines, Vogue, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Glamour, Wired, GQ, which was very, very cool. I didn't intend to work in journalism specifically, but being at the Times now, it's
Yeah.
amazing how relevant
Yeah.
all that experience has been.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I love that you had this journey, which is kind of unusual for people who eventually get to like engineering management and leadership, because we all typically start as individual contributors, engineers, and then we
Mhm.
got into management, often not knowing exactly what we're getting ourselves into, right? While instead you're saying that you kind of knew from the start, coming from that kind of management experience in another domain, that you would eventually want to do this in tech. But you spent also many years as a software engineer, you said, before being able to get back to that.
It was definitely a long game.
Yeah.
I had a very clear plan for myself. It's
Yeah.
actually, I work with and mentor a lot of managers, and
Hmm.
I'll often have people ask me, like, "Hey, it seems like you really love what you're doing. I'm interested in becoming a manager. What's your advice?" And I'm like, "I'm
Yeah.
not the person to ask about that, actually. I only know how to do this because you're already deeply passionate about it.
Yes.
So you'll have to find someone else in your manager matrix to support you for that
Yeah.
question."
Yeah, I wanted to ask, did you find something from your management experience in domains that are not tech to be useful, of course, when you got into tech management, but also to be useful when you were a software engineer in an individual contributor?
No, that's such a good question. I think it definitely set me up well to be a strong collaborator.
Hmm.
Um, Something I notice a pattern in engineers is their job ultimately is to know things. And
Hmm.
so there can be this bias, especially early on. There's like a nervousness or a hesitation around if you
Yeah.
don't know, like, shoot, this is my job. I'm supposed to know, and I don't know. And
Yeah.
it can shut more junior engineers down or slow them down a little bit while they go through that
Hmm.
curve of realizing, like, actually, your job is to figure it out. Actually, the job is to solve
Yeah.
problems. And so I didn't really have that. From the beginning, I was just like, I don't know anything. Let's
Yeah.
get in. So it made me a bit more, I think, like in conversations, especially with cross functional people,
Yeah.
more like in the conversation and not so worried from an ego standpoint of like, if I don't know
Yeah.
this answer, everyone's going to think I'm a moron. I was like,
Yeah.
hello, I'm a moron. Let's proceed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is also a perfect example of what we always say, that non-technical skills actually make you go very far, very quick, and just, the pure tech chops instead stop being useful by themselves pretty soon in your career as a software engineer. I guess it's been the same for you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think, everyone's profile when it comes to whether you're an engineer or whatever you are, everyone has different competencies, different things they're naturally really good at. But absolutely strong communicators, I think, tend to thrive.
Yeah.
Strong problem solvers, people who are really creative, and so just having your thing, it doesn't need to be a specific thing, but your specific natural skill set that you lean into within the context of
Yeah.
your job of being an engineer, I think is so helpful.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And so, speaking of what makes you unique in your profile, one of the reasons that why I really wanted to have this chat is that you're a big proponent of neuro leadership,
Mhm.
which is a topic that I've heard more and more about recently, and I would love to learn more. So, my first question is, what is your definition of neuro leadership, and how did you get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Neuroleadership is the application of neuroscience research and findings within a leadership context. It's all about understanding the structure and function of the brain and the nervous system and how those things impact the way people think, feel, and make decisions. And these are concepts that I was lucky to learn the basics of in my education program, so from my teaching degree. And when I got into leadership, again, seeing these parallels, seeing how these concepts that I'd started to learn were so relevant in a managerial environment. It's something I pursued with vigor. So I've attended a lot of trainings in the neuro leadership space. The Neuro Leadership Institute is a particularly good resource for this. I can't recommend their trainings and conferences
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah. And I have to say that in tech, probably, I don't know if more in tech than in other domains, but I'm pretty sure in tech it's like these engineers are often skeptical of this, of frameworks about skills that are not tech skills, soft skills, communication. And so I guess that Neuro Leadership is one of these where many software engineers would be skeptical about why is this useful for my job, right? So how do
Mm.
you position neuroscience-based leadership to technical people? What's the elevator pitch?
I guess I'll say this really isn't a conversation that comes up with engineers directly. So just like
Yeah.
you wouldn't go to a therapy session where the therapist announced, and now everyone watch while I perform
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah.
I'm not walking into conversations and announcing to the room that I'll be doing neuro leadership today.
Yeah.
But it is a framework that I use to approach my being, how I show up with others, and my work, my actual output, and the things that I do. And it's with a goal that I'm creating a more effective environment for the people around me to operate within, and that I'm setting us up to win and achieve, even in and especially in challenging circumstances, which are
Mm.
a requirement of the job.
Yeah.
And I'll say you probably didn't expect a hot take so early in this discussion, but here it
Go
is.
for it.
I genuinely find it baffling when people write off the science of neuro leadership and creating psychological safety as a soft skill. And if I'm really honest, when it comes to fellow leaders in particular, it's a bit of a bias for me that I have to watch out for. Because if another leader is engaging with me in a way that treats the science of psychologically safe
Yeah.
environments as optional or lesser, I assume that person is pretty early in their leadership journey, regardless of
Yeah.
their tenure. And
Yeah.
not that they're irredeemable, of course, but certainly that the science is available and they have made a choice not to engage with it.
Yeah. And what do you think that happens? I mean, why do you think some people have an easier time writing off this type of science versus, I mean, other things that instead we accept that it's science and so nobody argues about them? Why do you think it's the case here?
I think software engineering and like engineering fields are particularly affected by this because there's our jobs are these like very technical black and white sort of like binary
Mm.
things, and there's like a right and a wrong.
Yeah.
And that's not actually true, but I think that's like the impression and the approach that people can bring to it. And so when it comes to this idea of like teaminess and what does
Yeah.
that mean, like people are just sort of immediately reject it without really engaging with it at all. And
Yeah.
so I don't spend much time or energy trying to convince people who don't believe in neuro leadership, just like I probably wouldn't exert my time and energy trying to explain that the world is flat or round to a flat earther. Oh no, the world is not flat. Trying to explain that the world is round to a flat earther. Because like the science is there, it's available, consume it or don't. And I find my time is better spent applying the research myself and teaching what I know when people feel ready to learn.
Yeah. So, speaking of applying this research, walk me through your mental model of this. I mean, what are the key themes and topics that you take and apply in your job on a day to day?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is much in the domain of neuro leadership. One of my favorite, and I would argue the most foundational leadership frameworks comes from Dr. David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute, and it's called the SCARF model. And
Mm-hmm.
SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And SCARF is the management application, again, of neuroscience research that proves our brains respond to the social situations in front of us, much like physical threat and reward. And when I say social situation here, I simply mean any environment that involves other people. So a work environment is very much a social environment. And when I say physical threat or reward, think of how you might feel if I was holding a knife
Yeah.
versus if I was handing you a plate of warm cookies that I made just for you. And like, do you feel anything in your physical experience that shifts between those two things?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in any given social situation, we are evaluating the world, what we perceive through a few different lenses that have opportunity to trigger a knife or a cookie response. Status, how important we feel compared to others. Certainty, how predictable the future feels. Autonomy, our sense of control over events and choices. Relatedness, the feeling of connection and safety with others. And fairness, our evaluation if exchanges and decisions are just and equitable.
Yeah.
And when we perceive these 5 domains of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, when we perceive those to be safe and supported, the brain's reward circuitry and neural pathways are active. And when this happens, we feel super at ease. For me, I like myself best in this state. I'm grounded, light, present with the people around me. I'm focused. I'm funnier and more fun.
Yeah.
And in work terms, this is when we would use terms like people are being really collaborative, people are open to change, people can be influenced, those sort of like manager jargon terms
Yeah.
that we throw in there. Now, at the opposite end of the spectrum, when any of these domains feel threatened, when we perceive threat in any of these areas, the brain's threat circuitry kicks in and fires off a series of changes in the brain and body. And these are changes that help us survive in a crisis, something like a lion attack. So we go into this heightened monitoring state where all of our attention and energy is out on the environment. And we're scanning with a bias that everything is a threat. And that's an important piece to understand. In the threat state, we lose a level of discernment and ability to stop and evaluate if a movement in the bushes or someone rolling their eyes in a meeting could be a good or bad thing or have no meaning at all. Our brains are going to immediately mark that as threat. Oh my God, bad threat. We might die.
Yeah.
Threat. And this heightened state is built to last. Our bodies are pumping blood and oxygen to the largest muscles and in the body into the survival parts of the brain, limiting resources to the planning, reasoning, creative parts of our brain, and helping us stay prepared for longer term escape or defense.
Yeah. So what I'm getting is we have, let's say, our brain, full brain capacity, and when we are in like this threat mode, it's like a part of this capacity gets constantly reserved to assess threats that might be around, and so we get literally less capable of doing other things because we are continuously assessing all of this around us. And this is a very physical phenomenon, not just in our head. Let's say it affects the way our blood pumps and our concentration and all the physical signs that are associated with this.
Yes. And I think that's where, you highlighted that distinction of, is this like a touchy-feely topic about people's feelings? No, it's a science topic about our physical bodies and the way resources are available to us or not available to us for what we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your experience, so we went through these 5 elements of the SCARF model. Are there any that you have seen are more or less frequently triggered, I would say, in engineering teams for the better or worse?
Yeah, so all the domains are interconnected and at play at all times.
Yeah.
And there are absolutely certain situations where one or some may be more at play than the others.
Yeah.
As an example, things like performance reviews and promotion season are going to really scratch at exactly what you'd expect. Things like status and fairness. Is it fair that that person was promoted before me? What's my status compared to that person now they've been promoted and I haven't? These sorts of things. In just generic day to day work, I think engineers are most affected by certainty. Do I
Mm,
know where I am right now and what's coming? And can I predict what today will be like compared to yesterday or last week or last year?
yeah.
And especially, do I know where the goalpost is? And is it standing still or is it moving? That's a big one that comes up for engineering teams where the rate of change is quite high.
Yeah.
Autonomy is also a big one. Am I in control of my time and how I engage with my assigned work?
Yeah.
And to talk about something specific, code reviews are something that can so easily trigger someone's sense of status. Do
Yeah.
I have to accept this person's feedback? Is their perspective more valuable than mine? And autonomy, if I don't agree, do I have to accept it? Like, I want to do this my own way.
Yeah.
And it's not realistic to think, and the goal is not that we create perfection or absolutes across all of these domains all the time as a leader. The world is not predictable, our companies are not predictable, and in turn, our organizations and teams are not predictable. It wouldn't be accurate or authentic for me as a leader to communicate to my team that something like absolute certainty is guaranteed. It never
Yeah.
is. So the
Yeah.
goal with SCARF is not for no domains to be triggered, but instead that these domains are all levers as a leader that I can evaluate and play with.
Yeah. So when you look at one of these processes that you mentioned that has the potential to become problematic, like performance reviews or code reviews,
Mhm.
how do you uh, work through this? I mean, do you think in your head about some uh, red flags, do's and don'ts based on your experience, based on these 5 factors? How do you make sure that nothing of this becomes a threat?
Yeah, process is a huge place where I think through what I want a process to achieve. I might like lay out the steps of what I want to happen. And then I step back and I look at it through these 5 lenses of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness, and say, does this process honor these different domains or does it have potential to trigger any domains? Process is a
Yeah.
huge one. Also, communication. If I'm sending any sort of any communication, broad, narrow,
Yeah.
whatever. If I step back and look at it through the lenses, which to be fair, I don't have time to do every single time, but as I've practiced over the years thinking this through, I can predict more and I naturally speak more in a way
Yeah.
that touches on a reward state across the domains.
Yeah. So you recommend using that as a sort of checklist, keep in your head these 5 elements and try to preview in your head if anything about this process can become problematic about any of this.
Yeah, and let's maybe talk through a specific example and that
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
great. So while I was at Estee Lauder, there was an early rumor of impending layoffs that were several months out.
Yeah.
Now, as a leader, I knew that rumor was in fact true.
Mm.
And that's not something I had the privilege or it would have been appropriate to communicate outside of a formal process. So, communicating what I knew to my people, the layoff is real, but you're not affected, or the layoff is real and you will be affected. This might have created certainty for someone, sure, but that simply was not within my scope to communicate at that time. So when my direct reports started coming to me and saying, hey, the team is talking about layoffs and I'm really worried, I acknowledged that some domains were probably triggered and sought to decrease the total threat state by adjusting across all the levers I had to play with. So those conversations looked something like me saying, thank you for sharing your experience. And I really get that. Feeling uncertain about the future and like we don't have direct control over what comes next is so unsettling. So I acknowledged that certainty and autonomy are
Yeah.
probably triggered for this individual.
Yeah.
I don't have any information to share about this right now. If and when I have more information, I'll make sure you and the full team hear from me directly. So in this case, I narrow the scope of what certainty means, communicating that while I can't help them predict the reality of the layoff, I can help clarify that they're not missing anything. They can tone down the detective mode and feel more safe knowing that when and how they'll get updates should this come to fruition. And I've
Yeah.
also tickled fairness by reminding them that this information will be equally available for everyone on the team. They've not been left out of anything. That can be a big one.
Yeah.
And then I might tap into a different lever to support us here in this moment. So, in the meantime, it sounds like you and the team might be feeling anxious or distracted. What support do you see that could help you and the group feel more grounded, even in this uncertain moment? And this is going to tap us into relatedness. Me and this person's direct connection, I'm showing care and we're solving a problem together, and the connection of the broader team.
Mhm.
Now, did those people leave this conversation with no threat state? No. Like, layoffs
Impossible.
are
Yeah.
scary. Yeah. Nothing I can say
That's
is going
not
to
the
change
goal.
that.
Yes.
Not the
Yeah.
goal. But we shrunk the threat state and we activated some reward state. So we invited their brains back into a sense of community and control, and we can work together to decide what we do next to activate more of those possible resources.
Yeah, I love the example was so useful, and I love how many little details there were in that. I think there are many things when we communicate, especially hard things to others, that we may take for granted. I mean, we may think it's obvious that it's like this, but people really need to hear. Like when you said, reassuring people that they will learn about this, everyone at the same time. You will share information as soon as it's available. I mean, in your head, you might think it's obvious, right? But people need to hear that because it's not obvious at the end of the day. So yeah, I appreciated that.
Yeah, and I'll say a vacuum of communication is so tough for people. So
Hmm.
often, and as I have, grown in scope in my career, I've realized how often leadership teams don't want to communicate something too soon, which is absolutely valid. And when something isn't communicated about at all, it can be really triggering for people.
Yeah.
So even just saying, I don't have anything I can share about this right now can really help.
Yes, yes, exactly. I mean, I think that goes back to the idea of certainty. I mean, certainty even about the fact that there is no new information, certainty about uh, some bad news, but at least you're certain about that. It's better than
Mhm.
staying in the dark, I guess. So I wanted to ask, when you think about how to design some communication or some process to get received the best possible way through these factors, do you also think about the different people might have different sensitivity about and these
Mm.
domains? Do you think about specific people on your team, or maybe it depends on the type of process? Do you also think about that?
Absolutely. So, the Neuro Leadership Institute actually has a test you can take online if you're interested. I haven't taken it, but I know from my lived experience that certainty and relatedness are a big deal for me. I want to know what the goal is so I can plan towards it. I don't want it to move. And I want to know that I'm accepted and appreciated by the people around me. So, these domains are super sensitive triggers for me. And these also change with time and environment. So, status was something that used to be super easily triggered for me in a local work context. Like, I really cared about people knowing if I was the project lead, for example.
Yeah.
And I was easily triggered if someone else got credit for one of my ideas. But now that I'm more senior in my career, I naturally have more status. So, day to day situations like that don't really affect me. If someone gets credit for my idea, I'm like, okay, great. As long as we're moving forward towards the goal, whatever.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, thinking through, I think you have to, in some cases, there will be certain domains that will be triggered no matter what, and you just have to accept that. But you can definitely think through the process you're implementing, think through the comms you're writing through each of those domains, and think through if someone was easily triggered by this particular domain, how would they feel?
Yeah.
What do you think your most sensitive trigger is? Status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness?
For you mean for myself,
For you, yeah.
particularly? I've been thinking about this while you were speaking. I think autonomy is a big one.
Mm,
I mean, having grown, I mean, my longest professional experience have been as a founder of a startup. So to me, that's really important.
yeah.
I don't care probably a lot about statues because I mean I've done everything that was needed at any time, but I really need to feel I'm autonomous and I can go after the things that I want. Because if I feel instead my scope is too narrow or I can do the things the way I like, I'm not able to enjoy the experience, and I probably feel I'm not treated fairly, even though it's not the case. So I know that that's probably both a weakness and a strength. Depends on the situations, right? Depends on where you can use it for good or it becomes more of a weak point.
Absolutely. And I think that autonomy piece is really important for engineers, but for so many people.
Yeah,
And, you know, we're talking about psychological safety, specifically in the terms of the organizations and the teams we work within. But there is also a concept of psychological safety in any of the communities and containers that we as individuals exist within. And so right now in the broader industry, there is more inherent threat across the domains than we have seen for a while.
yeah,
Ongoing news of layoffs creates a feeling of uncertainty. Less hiring going on broadly means people might need to stay in a job that they don't totally love, which is lack of autonomy.
yeah,
The shift from a job seekers market to an employer driven market was swift and it had a huge hit to status and fairness.
yeah,
So, for leaders on the ground, I think we need to have some awareness that the baseline threat level for everyone is elevated, and we have to fiercely pursue ways to make working environments feel as psychologically safe as possible to counter that. And choice and autonomy is something I'm thinking about a lot right now for my teams. What can I do to make it feel like they're choosing their day to day?
yeah, yeah. Also because I think, especially in engineering, many people get into that uh, to because we are attracted to this domain where we feel we are in control of things, right? When we write software, we have this great feedback loop. It's like our special place where we can take care of everything. Everything is under our control. So I think many engineers, myself included, grow nurturing that kind of feeling and sensation. I mean, and so certainty and autonomy, I think, I mean, if I have to guess, I have no hard numbers, of course, but I would guess they're very important for engineers, especially.
Absolutely.
And I think also it's important what you said about market conditions, because sometimes we can do the best we can for our organization, our team, but then external conditions change, and those might trigger some of these responses, even if we're doing everything correctly, and we need to adjust to match this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and again, we talked about even just acknowledging the state, the heightened threat state, I think is helpful for people to say, like, things are kind of tough right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's focus on what we can here. And
As
frankly, I
simple
like,
as that. I think it
it's as
makes
simple as that.
yeah, simple as
Leadership
that.
done.
Yes, yeah. No, but I mean, it was no joke. I mean, even if you a small sentence like that, I think it makes a difference as opposed to just ignoring the fact, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
I feel that way. When I feel seen in that way, I have a really, really amazing manager. She's just like, she's such a straight shooter. Like,
yeah,
my sense of certainty with her, I always know that she means what she says and she says what she means. She's always like acknowledging when things are hard and appreciating my efforts regardless. I like, as a more senior leader, you don't always get that care in a leader. And I really have that. So I feel super lucky.
Yeah, it's great when it's like that. Unfortunately, it's not always like that, but I think great examples are also incredibly useful because they educate, your taste about what's good, right? I mean, how it can be, so that you can diagnose better when things are not that way. What's the gap and how you can bridge that gap? So lucky to have a great example.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we talked about, let's say, I wouldn't say happy cases, but more like prevention, right? How you design things for to be good.
Mhm.
But I guess many of us will be already in situations, whether it's processes or team cultures, where many of these things are not, well respected. We feel threatened in some domains. And how do you diagnose this? How do you realize that some of these factors are being threatened and there are problems? How do you realize that?
Yeah, I'll say sometimes you can make an informed guess based on the situation or what you know about a person if you're working with someone specifically. Um, if the person is experiencing a threat state, if they're being vocal with feedback about a situation, you can actually really easily parse out some verbiage that will make it clear. So people
Mm,
might say things like, that didn't seem fair, or he was talking down to me, or there isn't a major sense of team. And you can like very easily map these to their domains of what might be important for someone. But the truth is, you can't always know from the outside. So the most effective thing to do is ask. A big part of the work of leadership is getting personal, building enough trust that you can say, hey, I noticed this situation seemed tough. Tell me about it and tell me why it's important to you. And people will often tell you, and that conversation is far more powerful than trying to diagnose in the abstract. I
yeah,
can think of multiple times when someone was telling me about something and they were really spun up. That state when someone is basically monologuing about their frustration and the conversation isn't really going anywhere. That's a classic, like, neuro triggered state that someone can work themselves into.
yeah,
And just saying, I can see this is really important to you. Tell me about why. They'll
yeah,
almost immediately calm down and start to touch on one or more aspects of SCARF.
yeah. I totally agree, and I think I think many times for us engineers, things feel more complex than they need to be. I asked this question, and basically you just answered, man, talk with people. And you're right, but as engineers, sometimes we say we have to get data, telemetry, feedback loops, systems. One instead, go to one-on-one conversations. How do you feel about this? I mean, what's so hard to do? But it doesn't come natural, I think, to many. But I mean, talking with, with real people and asking them how they feel, yeah, I think pretty good advice, if you ask me.
it's very it's very accelerating, I'll
Yeah,
say. It can really move from, as a leader, I see a situation and like, when our own threat state is activated as leaders, we might be like, oh my God, our people aren't happy. There's this thing, or I did something and now they're in a threat state. Like, oh my God, our own threat state gets all in a
yeah,
tizzy. So we really have to pay attention to, let me actually just slow all the way down, look at what's happening directly in front of me, and how can I deal with this situation from my
yeah,
own place of grounded, of presence, of cookie feelings.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. And so far we talked about implementing these ideas into specific process or using them in conversations,
Mm.
uh, for, let's say, for you as a manager, but you are a person. So how do you, an individuals, but how do you scale this beyond individual managers to making it part of your culture or making it part of your engineering organization? I mean, how do you spread this way of thinking about things?
Yeah, I I think that the question highlights the path. So I believe that managers are the most underutilized resources in most software engineering orgs. There's been somewhat of a shift in the broader industry to some companies questioning the value of line managers. And I
True.
can see and understand the observations and the data that may have led to that perspective, but I disagree with the assessment. I think most companies have failed their managers. They underinvest in training with little practical guidance provided early in managers' tenure. They underinvest in community building for their leaders. They put out a training or two throughout the year, usually directly having to do with performance management, and usually watered down by 100 rounds of revisions through HR and legal. Not that we don't love our friends in HR and legal, they are the best, but
Say hi to them.
hi to them. Hi, guys. But it comes out to a training that's basically some vagaries about like, do active listening and be empathetic.
Yes.
So I just don't see enough things like this being taught. Here's a research study. Here's a way of thinking. Here's shared verbiage we can use to figure out the messy work of management together. So I teach my managers these concepts, and orgs are transformed through these high-powered levers of managers. So over time, by more leaders thinking in this way and leading in this way and demonstrating these ways of thinking, that's how we transform an org.
Yeah. So you think it's like trickling down these teachings, from manager down to his reports, down to their reports, so that this gradually, organically, I should say, gets spread throughout the company. It's not about a specific process or a framework for managing this or that. It's more throughout embodying the culture through leaders and individuals that lead by example, let's say.
Yes, absolutely. And I had this very lived experience. So when I was at Etsy, I spent the most of my time leading data engineering teams. And I had some of the best, happiest teams. I would argue in the industry. We like those teams were some of the happiest moments of my life. And I've been leading these teams, and the teams were thriving. We had these crazy engagement scores every year. Everyone was like really happy and doing amazing work. And so people started to ask, Meg, what's going on over here? And I was invited to participate in a role that was more of an engineering ops role. So rather than leading a team, thinking about some of these concepts in more of an abstract role. At the top of the engineering organization in strategy and operations. And I did that for about 6 months. And I just did not enjoy it at all.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was effective. Like, I don't look at those 6 months and I'm like, look at all of the psychological safety I created. Look at all these processes I implemented and they changed the game. That's not what happened. Instead, the most powerful moments I've had are being a part of a team, are modeling the behaviors in real life situations for others to see and learn from, rather than being someone who just talks about these things and like puts it into a process that then that like no one ever reads. And not to say that those things aren't valuable too. I think it's all required. But for me, the way I can serve most powerfully is as a leader on the ground.
So you think that the reason why that experience did not work was that it was more like a top-down, outside of the team effort, and that it's not how you create these conditions. You can only create them from within. That's what you're saying.
Yes. And there's the training aspect. People need to be trained on this information, but then the application and the actual change occurs, the cultural change occurs when people live that knowledge, when they practice these skills, when they hone their craft of participating in and creating psychologically safe environments for the people around them. And what I loved about my teams at Etsy is, I was modeling these behaviors, and then all the engineers started modeling these behaviors too. And so, and not to say that I take full accountability for how great those teams were. Every single person on that team made those teams great. But you could see the staff engineers really taking care of and thinking about how the more junior engineers on the team would feel about different things. You could see the way they engaged in PR review or teaching would like take care of people's brains. And so seeing that real impact of like modeling the behavior and seeing it modeled by others was so cool.
Yeah. If there is any way in which these concepts apply different to the work of individual contributors like software engineers versus how they do for managers or directors like you, or we are talking about core psychological principles, so it's the same for everybody.
It is the same for everyone. Also, have you ever heard the phrase, the cobbler's kids have no shoes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
If anyone hasn't, it's an idiom that means sometimes in applying our skills to serve many, we might become too busy or neglectful to use our
Yes.
expertise to help ourselves
Yeah.
or those closest to us. So I'll say the difference between ICs and managers is that ICs are inherently part of a team, which is an automatic point for relatedness. And if they have an experienced manager, they have someone who's thinking about them and their precious brains like all the time. So they have a
Yeah.
smaller surface area to potentially trigger, and there is someone taking care to not activate their triggers.
Yeah.
Managers, not never, but much more rarely, have a team that they're creating with. And because they are a critical funnel for information, their own reporting relationship with their boss can become much more about making sure all the proper context is shared in both
Yeah.
directions than about their boss taking care of their brains. So they have this full surface area that can be triggered, and no one's thinking about not triggering them. So I'll say
Yeah.
working with managers by default, many of them are at least somewhat triggered most of the time. And many of those people are already well equipped to handle those threat responses themselves, but I try to be pretty proactive with filling needs that they may not be thinking of for themselves. So I encourage community. I try to take care to notice when they might be feeling they don't have a choice in something. This is often deadlines or something that they perceive to be absolute that might not actually be. Try to invite them back into a feeling of creative choice and that sense of autonomy. I remind them how
Yeah.
much I value their unique skills, and I try to let them know when something is certain and to name when there's lacking clarity, so at least we can all be certain that it's uncertain together.
Yeah.
And I don't nail all these things all the time, to be clear, but I find the need to think about SCARF shows up 100% of the time when working with managers, and we need to take better care of them. They're doing
Yeah.
such important work.
Yeah, I love your perspective about being part of a team and how, I mean, I never reflected on this, but actually it's true that for software engineers, it's obvious that they're part of a team, right? I mean, the structure is clear. I think the belonging structure, let's say for them. While for managers, it's trickier, because you have your team, but you have the managers. So I think the sense of belonging is a little bit different. And then you have your reporting structure, your manager. It's not exactly a team that you have outside. It's different. So I can totally see how they get triggered. I mean, they're more at risk, probably.
Totally. Again, we have to take care of them.
Yeah,
Everyone
absolutely.
help your managers.
Yes.
Give their closest manager a high five. They deserve it.
Yes, I think this is the perfect closing thought. That we can close with this prayer. Please, everybody, take good care of their managers.
Please, please.
Thank you so much, Meg, for the great chat. Thank you.
Luca, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.